It's not a factor in the cost of those houses. How does it work? As I said, it's a 501c3. It's led by a board of directors, community directors, and we'll talk about that in a minute. It's an independent corporation, so it's not an arm of the city. It's not an arm of UNC Chapel Hill. It's an independent corporation that has a nonprofit status from the federal government. It owns the land and it manages the land. Now remember, the houses will be purchased by people, but it will maintain that land and manage it. Its job is to balance the needs of the larger community. So think about the neighborhood associations, think about the area where it buys houses or builds houses, and it needs to think about that community. So those directors will be charged with looking at the broad community and protecting land and housing. And it's going to operate on a principle of equitable and inclusive development. What that means is it goes back to that supply chain. We would like the houses to be built, rehabbed by people in Rocky Mount. So not bring a firm from Raleigh or Greenville, but have builders, plumbers, electricians, people in Rocky Mount doing the work so that we create jobs. And that means we'll have to think about how we give incentives to businesses so that they can bring people in, how we help people with what they need to sit for a general contractor's exam or a plumber's license. And we want to focus on equity and inclusiveness, and we really want to look at minority business enterprises in Rocky Mount and make sure that it's a fair percentage that goes to those businesses. That's what we mean by equitable and inclusive. The capital that a land trust uses, so a land trust can go out, it can take donations of land. So there may be people here who have passed away, who have a piece of land, their heirs have it, they don't want to manage it. They can donate that to the land trust and take a tax deduction. It's a 501c3. The land trust can raise money from foundations. The land trust can work with financial institutions. So I worked at the Federal Reserve. It was a banking regulator. The banks have to invest in communities where they do business. That's the Community Reinvestment Act. They have to invest, they have to lend, and they have to provide services. So banks can be a key partner. They can invest in the land trust. They can provide mortgages for the people who buy the houses, special mortgages that go with it. They can do lending for the land trust later. They can provide services. There's a whole range. They can even do workforce development. We can talk to the banks in the area about investing in the minority businesses that do the trades that build the buildings. That qualifies for CRA. So banks can be a huge partner. Private foundations can be a partner. Public entities. Money comes down from the federal government, programs state government working with the city, can take land that the city may be too busy to upkeep. It may be a good fit for them to give that piece of land to the land trust. These are all possibilities. There's donor advised funds at community foundations where people have put money away and said they want it to be used for A, B, and C. Some of those might match up. And then we have companies in the area that have philanthropic arms or impact investment arms that would want to invest in this as well. So these are a whole range of places a land trust can get land, houses, or capital. The land or the homes, as I mentioned, you can have individuals in the community that may want to donate it. You may have a developer who comes in to do a project and they buy a large piece of land and they present the city with a project. You can talk to that developer about having them carve out a piece of that land for workforce housing. So again, lots of options for a land trust. Okay, this is a short video that a group called Grounded Solutions did that'll kind of summarize what I just said. They work with 255 land trusts around the country, help set them up, help guide them, help collect best practices. So we're going to play this short clip.
Community land trusts, or CLTs, are nonprofit organizations that acquire, own, and steward land permanently for the common good. The most common CLT land use is housing, but retail, office, and a variety of other provides for a mortgage, and the CLT keeps the land, holding it in trust for future generations of home buyers. In return for being able to buy a home at a discounted price, the family agrees to pay it forward and sell to another low-income family at a price they can afford. The CLT manages the sales process, ensuring that each home-buying family builds some wealth from a predetermined, limited amount of the sales proceeds. In this way, the one-time public or private investment in CLT homes makes lasting affordability a reality and stabilizes communities. And CLTs benefit the larger community too, as they preserve and protect housing for long-term residents, helping to build stronger, safer, and higher quality diverse neighborhoods, contributing to greater educational attainment, employment opportunities, and health outcomes. Visit groundedsolutions.org to learn more about CLTs today.
Okay, so normally I would stop and ask for questions, but because it's COVID, I can't stop and do the mic and then come back. So, think of any questions you have, write them down, and we're going to dive into what that video said a little bit more, and kind of work our way through this, and then we'll let you ask lots of questions. Okay, so basically, in that video, it talked about the buying process. So the land trust owns the land, going to build houses or renovate houses. And we're going to talk about something extra special for Rocky Mount in a few minutes, which is not just building the houses, but also building accessory dwelling units, which would then offer more opportunities for places for people to live, as well as potentially more income for that homeowner. But basically, you've got this land trust that owns these pieces of property. So let's just say it's a couple of properties on a street, Carolina Street. And they build the new houses, and then buyers come in, are interested. We work with the banks on a special mortgage because it's not a mortgage like you would get if you own the house and the land. So they offer special programs for that. And in many cases, special deals as far as the interest rate and the down payment and all of that. And we'd work with that, have the person qualified to be able to purchase. Let's say it's a $100,000 house, but if you added in the value of the land, it might be $120,000. So they're just getting the mortgage for the $100,000. They buy the house just like they would any other property. The land trust owns the land. Now, one of the things we'll have to figure out is to what extent that land trust works with the land. So is it going to be, it could be $1 a year lease to the person who owns the house that's kind of built into their mortgage. So if they live there 20 years, $20. It could be a little bit more. It could be $10 and it could include having the grass mowed. It could be a little bit more and include fence and landscaping. So those are things the board will have to decide to what degree that land is improved and maintained by that land trust. But it could be as simple as $1 a year. So that's built into the mortgage. The person lives there. It has a term on it, just like any type of mortgage. After the person's lived there 10 years, they decide they want to sell. Well, when they bought the house, they made an agreement to work with the land trust so that another family similar to them in terms of income can purchase that house. They sell it. The land trust is part of the deal because of the land. The next family comes in and buys it. The original family, maybe the house now values at $120,000. It goes back to that price. They take their equity. They move on. The next family comes in. So instead of people rushing into Rocky Mount and driving up the land price, which is what's happening in Wake County and other places, that land is just going to stay with this nonprofit, and it's not going to factor into the escalation of the price of the property. And the homeowner really will not know the difference. It's not an intrusive relationship where you've got some strange board over, messing with the land all the time. It's the community, and that's part of the agreement. Okay, next slide. So again, this just kind of walks through it. It's pay it forward. You live in it, you use the house, you acquire equity, you sell it to another family, they do it, and so on and so forth. There may come a point in time when that house needs to be improved, and the land trust would raise capital to make improvements. Next slide. And so this is just a quick example of that. Like I said, maybe it's a $100,000 house. $80,000 for the house, $20,000 for the land. You work out the mortgage with the bank. They buy it. They live in it. We figure out what the terms are with the land. They sell it, and then we just continue cycling on. One of the reasons why a lot of land trusts do rental, a lot of land trusts do multifamily. We were really keen on Rocky Mount doing ownership because the ownership rate here is lower than the average in North Carolina. So this looks to be a place where people will benefit, and we know from our experience here that people will benefit from that home ownership and that will help create wealth in the community. So we're looking at a 1,300 square foot home, 3 bedrooms, 2 bath. What used to be somewhat of a starter home, but in many places, the cost of those is out of reach. With this additional unattached small unit called an accessory dwelling unit or a granny flat, or it could be an office, but it would have, according to the code in Rocky Mount, it could be rented to others. It could be a caretaker for an elderly person in the house. It could be a child care worker who works with the owner of that house on a home-based child care. Lots of options. You've increased the density. You've added another option for people for housing, and potentially you've added another income stream. It would be a unit with that land trust. So it would not be, I move, I sell the house, I keep the rent from the accessory dwelling unit. The house and the accessory dwelling unit are separate as far as utilities, but they would be a package deal in working with the land trust. So what do we have to do? So that's kind of the basics of the land trust. Now, what do we have to do to create this in Rocky Mount? Well, we have to create this nonprofit. And so there's some steps that we go through. We create that, and I'm going to go through the steps. And then we'd want to have a business plan, and we've put together some ideas for the city as to what that business plan looks like. We've talked about equitable and inclusive development. So we have some ideas about that. We're calling that an accelerator for trades. You've heard about business accelerators. This is one that focuses on masonry, construction, plumbing. This would be the job supply for that house. And we've also talked about a child care accelerator. So we'll go into that in a few minutes as well. But we've thought about some ways to help. We have a lot of women who are not able to work, especially because of the pandemic, because child care has gone away in homes and in other places. So we want to think about ways that we can maximize people in employment. And one of those might be at-home-based child care. So we've come up with some ideas about how we can incorporate that. All right, so there's some basic elements for creating this nonprofit. You get some incorporators. We find a few people in the community to come together to agree to take on that fiscal liability of actually creating the land trust. They're going to be board members. We come up with a name. We've come up with one. It may not be the name, but we wanted to play around and come up with a name for it, and I'll show you that in a second. You buy that domain name on the internet, because many of us have learned the hard way that if you file with the Secretary of State, there are people that sit there and look at the names and they grab those domain names and then they want you to buy them from them. It's like it's a virtual business. So we buy the domain name and we don't have to worry about that. We get an EIN number, which takes 10 seconds. We file the papers with the Secretary of State and get that paperwork going. And then we have to start supplying some other material. So we have to supply the Secretary of State's office with the board. What's the process going to be for electing the board? What are their terms? What does that look like? How are they going to be trained? What are the bylaws that it's going to operate? What are those policies about how it's going to operate? Have those approved by the board. We get a DUNS number, which means we're good to do business, and that's a seal of approval with investors and foundations. And then we go to the IRS and we get a designation as a 501c3. So we can raise money while we're waiting for it, but ultimately we want to have that stamp of approval. And then we think about what professional services we need. So these are the steps. And it can be done in a few months. The longest part of the process is that IRS designation. But if you have an immediate need for housing or for whatever the nonprofit's going to do, you can get the IRS to speed it up a little bit.